Hey everyone. So as I talked about in class, I wanted to go ahead and just review question 6 because it's a pretty lengthy question. It can get confusing if you uh, don't take the time to try and figure out what's the gist of the question. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this question, try and answer the 10 or so questions that were asked here. This question read, Roche Brothers is considering capacity expansion of the supermarket. The landowner will build the addition to suit it in return for $225,000 upon the completion of a 5-year lease. Okay, the increase in rent for the addition is going to be at $10,000 a month. Annual sales are projected for the 5 years below. Okay. The current effective capacity is equivalent to 500,000 customers a year. So with the current space, they can accommodate 500,000 customers. Assume a 22% pre-tax profit on sales. Okay, so the first question we have here is A, if Roche expands its capacity to serve 700,000 customers, what are the projected annual incremental pre-tax cash flows that are attributable to this expansion? Okay, so per our discussion in class, start off with a base scenario, get the data, figure out how much can they make without expanding. Okay, so I'm going to copy this data onto a new tab, Control, and I'll paste it over here. And actually, because the data is not in the format I want it to be, I'm going to flip my data over. So I'll copy this again, and I'm going to paste transpose. I'll do a paste special transpose to have the data in columns rather than in rows. Okay, so once I've done that, I can go ahead now and delete this. And this now gives me my data as I would prefer to see it. Last thing I want to do is wrap my data, make sure I can see my entire title to the question or to the table. Okay, so I have my data here. I can now go ahead and try and figure out what's my base scenario going to be. Okay, so in the base scenario, let me put this here, a base scenario, our capacity is limited to 500,000 customers. We cannot go beyond 500,000 customers in any given year. Okay, so I'm going to take the same data here, copy and paste it down here in our base scenario. And if our capacity is limited to 500,000 customers, I know in year 1, we can only accommodate 500,000 customers. So even though there are more customers expected, we are only going to limit our projection to 500,000 customers. The same for year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 5, because we don't have the space to accommodate all these visitors, all these customers here. So for this base scenario, you expect to have the exact same number of customers. And on the basis of a customer base of 500,000, my sales projection, my total sales for year 1 is going to equal 500,000 customers multiplied by the average sales per customer. Okay, so I expect to have sales of around $25 million in year 1. And if you drag that down, you get your sales data for each and every year after that. Okay, now from the sales information we have here, I want to calculate what will my profit be. And these are the 2 columns of data that I want to add to both the base scenario as well as the scenario 1. Okay, so my profit will be a fraction of my total sales. And for my data, we're told to assume a 22% pre-tax profit. Okay, so my pre-tax profit here is going to be equal to 22% multiplied by 25 million. Okay, and I'll repeat the same for each and every year after that. 22% of the total profit for each year after that. Okay, so that gives me my first scenario. My total profit for the 5 years is going to come up to, I'm going to sum these up, equal sum $31 million. Okay, so I'm done with the base scenario. I'm going to pause it there, and I'm going to compare this base scenario to our scenario 1 where we actually expand. So let's have a scenario 1, which is our expansion. And per what we're told in the question here, if Roche expands its capacity to serve 700,000 customers, what will its profits be and what will its incremental cash flows be? Okay. So now with this expansion, our capacity now increases to capacity equals 700,000. Okay. And if that's the case, I can repeat the same calculations I have up here. So I'll copy this table over, save me some time that way. But now I have to change the number of customers we can serve because we've expanded our facility. So I'll go back to our initial data here and look to see how many customers do we expect to have come in every year. So if we expand to 700,000, I know that I can fit in every single data point here except for year 5. In year 5, we anticipate having more customers than we have capacity. Okay, so in that year alone, we're going to change our customer amount to 700,000 instead of 715,000. Okay, so I'll copy these numbers down here. And for year 5, we limit our capacity to the max, which is 700,000 as well. Okay, so that now gives us our value of the number of customers, the total sales, and the profit amount. So we are going to add to this a figure for incremental cash flows. Okay, and we are told that there are a couple of things that we need to add here. One, for us to expand, we have to pay a contractor, right? And that contractor is going to be paid here in time period 0. So add a row and let that be time period 0. So we are not told how much profits we'll make in this time period. We're only told that there's going to be a net cash outflow. We're paying a contractor. Let's subtract the amount it takes us to pay this contractor. And we're told that this is going to equal, where do we have that? Okay, the information here. The landowner will build the addition to suit in return for $225,000 upon the completion of the expansion. And there'll also be a monthly increase in rent equal to $10,000 a month. Okay, so let's add those to our calculation. So in the first time period here, we're going to pay a contractor $225,000. And in time period 1, the only thing that I'm going to change here is that now we have to factor in the fact that we are paying rent. And the amount of rent has to be subtracted from our profit. So our calculation of our profit after rent has been deducted equals, was that 10,000 a month? And multiply that by 12 months because we're looking at data for 1 entire year. Okay, so your profit minus your rent goes into this column here. So I'm going to change my heading here and say profit minus rent. Okay, and that's what I have in this formula here. The first part of this is the profit, 22% of the total sales. And then we subtract however much we're paying for rent, which is a total of around $120,000 a year. Okay, so once I have that formula in place, we can drag it all the way down to year 5 and then calculate our incremental cash flow. Now, your incremental cash flow is the difference between how much you make in profit here versus how much you would have made in the base scenario. Okay, so the difference in profit is for year 1 is this 5.9 million minus the base profit, which was 5.5 million. Okay, and then I go on to what is this? Year 2, I'll repeat the same. incremental cash flow here is going to equal 6,876 minus, it's a base 5,830. And you continue repeating this over and over and over until you get to year 5. Okay, so these incremental cash flows are what I want to plug into my what's it called? Into my Pearson homework assignment, right? This is what's being asked. Whatever values I have here, I'll take that, plug it into my what's it called? Into my homework assignment, and that becomes the solutions to that question. The first part of the question. Okay. Now, the second part to this, and the second part to this says, if Roche expands its capacity to sell 700,000 customers per year, at the end of year 2, the landowner will build the same addition for 230 at the end of year 2. Okay, so this is a second scenario where the expansion happens 2 years down the road. Okay, and after that expansion, we're going to be incurring a rent of $11,000 a month, and we repeat the process over. So let's recreate this table and let's have scenario 2. So I'll copy, paste this down here, and I'm going to call this scenario 2. Expansion in year 2. Okay, let's get rid of this customer data here because I want to recalculate it again. All right, let's see how many customers we can accommodate in year 1. Okay, remember for year 1, this is before the expansion. And that means that we are limited to the initial capacity of 500,000 because we've not yet expanded the facility. So for year 1, we will only have 500,000 customers. Okay. Year 2, again, we've not yet expanded. So even though it says we expect 600,000 customers, we do not have the space for 600,000 customers just yet because expansion is happening at the end of the year. So think about it, we're going to be expanding on December 31st. Okay, so we cannot accommodate the customers in year 2. We are still at just a capacity of 500,000. Okay, and then we have the expansion at the end of year 2, and that brings us up to 700,000. Okay, so starting at the beginning of year 3, now we have sufficient space to make however much we need to make in year 3, which is 685,000. We can also make everything we need to make in year 4, which is 700,000. It's only year 5, which we might have a bit of a capacity gap again. Okay, so I'm going to have those numbers here. Year 3 equals 685. Year 4 equals 700,000. Year 5, this is our new limit. We can't go beyond 700,000 customers, so this stays at 700,000. Okay. So I'll multiply that by the average customers here, and that will enable us to calculate our total sales. Okay. So our total sales is your number of customers multiplied by the average sales per customer. How we get that here. Okay. Then I'll use the total sales value here to calculate my profit margin, which is my profit percentage, 22%, multiplied by the total sales amount. Okay. Now for this first month I have here, I'm not paying any additional rent because we've not yet expanded. So I'm going to start off with my calculation just as for the profit. Okay. So it'll be 22% times this value that I have here. I know in your homework, the profit margins here might be like 2% or 3% or something like that. Mine had 22%. Okay. So 22% of the total sales gives me 5.5 million. Okay. Is there any additional cost here? Not that I know. Okay. Let's clear this because it's going to be confusing. Let's start with just year 1. So at the end of year one, all that we're getting is a profit of 5.5 million. There's no rent to pay, no extra rent. There's no facility cost involved. I'm going to drag this formula down to year two. The profit in year two is going to be $5.83 million. But at the end of year two, we are planning for an expansion. So there's going to be a cost here. And the cost of that expansion is $230,000. And after that, in year three, we're going to be incurring some rental expenses of $11,000 a month. Okay, so for year two, I need to subtract the rent, the cost of that expansion, which is $230,000. 131, 2, okay, and I get a profit of $5.6 million. Next, in year three, the only cost that I'll incur is now the rent, and my rent is going to be $11,000 a month. 1, 2, 3, multiplied by 12 months in a year. So my annual rent is going to be $132,000. Okay, so I will have my profit here equals to 22% times the total sales, and I will subtract the rent we're paying. My rent for year three is $132,000. Okay. All right. So with that, our profit goes up, and I can drag this all the way down to year five. Okay. So now I have my profits for all 5 years. The next thing I want to do is calculate my incremental cash flow. And again, this incremental cash flow is the difference between scenario 2 minus base scenario, the base scenario here. So that means that I'm going to subtract this amount here. I'm going to subtract the base amount from year one's profit. So base amount of profit was 5.5 million. There's no incremental cash flow in my situation here. In year two, let's drag it down. That's when we paid to have the expansion. So my incremental cash flow there is the cost of that expansion. And I can drag this down for the rest of the months, or the rest of the years that we have here. And this, again, these are the numbers that should answer my question on the Pearson website. Okay, so that's how you go about doing that. Start off with the base scenario, figure out what's the profit with the base scenario, then create a second table with this new expanded scenario, figure out the total sales, figure out the profit, and then deduct any cost associated with your expansion, deduct any cost associated with rent for each and every year. Okay, and then finally create a column and figure out the difference between the expansion data and the base data. So that concludes what I wanted to discuss here. Okay. All the best as you do your homework. Thank you.